Forgiveness is not a word that I use very often. And I'm not sure exactly why that is. It might have something to do with a religious connotation. I'm not sure. Even so, I'm going to speak about forgiveness as a compassionate act, as a part of our compassion practice. Thich Nhat Hanh spoke about forgiveness in this way. He said, it is the understanding that while we are victims of others who cause us suffering, they themselves are also victims of suffering. It never justifies abuse or violence. Understanding that suffering stems from suffering can help ease the forgiving process and gradually offer some spiritual and emotional freedom to the forgiver. We've been speaking about freedom and the joy of liberation. I think that Thich Nhat Hanh's words speak to the heart of this. In a mindfulness practice, our view widens and deepens, and the grips of the I, me, and mine begin to loosen. Forgiveness of ourselves, forgiveness of others is the ongoing practice of freeing ourselves and others from suffering. The experience of forgiveness is the experience of letting go. A dictionary definition, well, it's Merriam-Webster's dictionary, defines forgiveness as to cease to feel resentment. Now, resent is an interesting word. It literally means to feel over again, to re-sense. Here are some of Susan Morgan's words on forgiveness. As I looked them up, I was imagining her saying these words out loud and her experience of these words. And I took comfort from this. It was a refuge in many ways. She writes, "We have all been betrayed, rejected, ignored, and judged. We have all caused harm and been harmed, knowingly and unknowingly, justly and unjustly, by ourselves and by others. Though we know that everyone makes mistakes, we can sometimes have a really hard time forgiving ourselves and others for these transgressions. And we can walk around holding and nursing grudges we've had since childhood. We can feel righteous and protective of the grudges and the vigilance that accumulates around them. There is that resensing over and over and over. It's painful. I don't deserve to be forgiven. But who gets hurt by these righteous positions? More than anyone else, we suffer. Forgiveness is a specific act of compassion, a way to lessen suffering. It is not weak. It is not Pollyanna. It does not mean we condone the misdeed. It is wisely recognizing the bondage of that suffering. It hurts to hate. It hurts us. Our bodies, our hearts and minds are afflicted with some kind of ill will, some variant of ill will. And these unwholesome mind states are hindrances to clear seeing and feeling. I know in my own life there is one person in particular I haven't forgiven. I consider myself a fairly forgiving person. And I can, at this time in my life, feel the lacking of forgiving as a suffering in my body and heart. I can feel my body tighten and grip when I think of this person. For years, I felt pumped up by my self-righteous position, easier to feel the anger and the self-righteousness than the original hurt. The wound is where the light comes in, right? The healing is in the wound. That's what Rumi said. Compassionate touch with this heart wound. Without attending to this wound, I can feel the contraction and limitations in my own capacity to love. We want to become familiar with our wounds. It is a necessary part of this process. It is absolutely necessary that we allow ourselves to become familiar with these wounds and with the feeling of having been wounded. It has to be included in our forgiveness. Closing the heart is painful. Opening the heart is also painful. So we want to do so with a lot of metta and at our own pace. We want to do so with a lot of compassion. I really appreciated Maria's sort of emphasizing slowly. Forgiveness can be a long process. It can't be pushed. We need to meet ourselves right where we are. And we want to find the resources or other person's supports we need. For me to forgive this other person, I have to recognize and value their suffering. Because Buddha was a revolutionary teacher, and he encouraged us to aspire to value others as we value ourselves. Compassion takes my J story that's marked and sometimes consumed by worries and fears and sorrows and grief and circumstances, and see the story of myself in all stories and lives. I've mentioned this before, and I feel it's so important. When Christina Feldman writes, compassion is not a state or an emotion. It is an understanding. It is an understanding that your suffering is my suffering. Susan asked, how long must we keep ourselves imprisoned by our own or others' wrongdoings? And then she said, until we can feel the damage we cause ourselves by holding on to the hot coals and feeling how it burns the flesh. I love Thich Nhat Hanh in anger saying, if someone burns down your house, don't chase after the arsonist. You need to attend to your house because the house is on fire. We need to attend to these fires that are inside. Forgiveness is possible when we see and recognize and feel and acknowledge this suffering. Zen teacher Yoko Beck wrote, our failure to know joy is a direct reflection of our inability to forgive. What's your sense of this? Jack Kornfield, treasured Buddhist teacher, says we tell stories of forgiveness in order to remember the transforming power of our heart. Our hearts have the ability to transform suffering. A few years ago, I was part of a book read. It was a national book read. And we read a book written by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. Maybe some of you have read it. It's entitled The Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States of America. I had to put this book down frequently because each page was painful to read. Here's one excerpt from this book. 1779. George Washington orders preemptive action to be taken against the Haudenosaunee Indians. He dictates to Alexander Hamilton a letter to be sent to Major General John Sullivan. And this is what that says. Lay waste all the settlements around, that the country may not be merely overrun, but destroyed. You will not by any means listen to any overture of peace before the total ruining of their settlements is effected. Our future security will be in their inability to injure us and in the terror with which the severity of the chastisement they receive will inspire them. General Sullivan replies, the Indians shall see that there is enough malice in our hearts to destroy everything that contributes to their support. In Washington, D.C., 2017, there was a gathering of tribal leaders led by the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. And here is a partial excerpt of what one tribal chief shared at an interfaith service at this event. He said, "We stand in the gap for those who are unable or unwilling to forgive, and call upon the Master of Life to forgive us for harboring unforgiveness, resentment, hatred, bitterness, and rage. We repent of every curse spoken over America by our ancestors, and we release the power of forgiveness to bring healing and the peace of Creator God to this land. Forgiveness doesn't relieve the offender of their responsibility for their action, nor does it turn a wrong into a right." I'm going to close by just sharing this story that was, it was really a Dharma teacher shared his experience of coming into a Zen practice. And he said when he came into practice, he was consumed with anger at everybody, everything. And it was really making it hard for him to breathe. He was really feeling despair and he did not know what to do about it. So one day he went to his teacher in total desperation and he said, "Help, what can I do?" And his teacher said, "I have a practice and I guarantee you that it will work. Every day in your home, you should do 108 prostrations every day. You don't have to do them all at once, but make sure you do them every day. And with each one, I want you to say, 'I forgive you.'" The teacher, then students said, "Oh, okay, but who am I forgiving? I'll do it." The teacher said, "You'll find out." So he did this. 108 prostrations every day and saying, "I forgive you," 108 times, week after week after month after month. And then one day, in the middle of doing this, he broke down in tears and sobbed. And he knew who he really needed to forgive. Forgiveness is a process. It doesn't happen quickly. It's not one single event. Sometimes we might enter it and not even know we're there. Compassion, in its deepest sense, embraces the most difficult people in our lives, maybe even the most brutal. Maybe that is right here. It's concerned with meeting suffering and uprooting the causes of suffering: greed, hatred, and confusion. We can't force ourselves to be compassionate or to forgive, but we can meet ourselves where we are, and we can set up the conditions to help them to arise. This is within our capacity. We can do this. Thank you for listening